Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be redesigning Operetta from Monster High. So starting off, I'm sketching out her frame. I wanted her to have a curvy body type since I always imagined her looking somewhat similar in body shape and height to Torlight Stripe, so that's what I'm going with here. For the mood board, I wanted to be taking my inspirations primarily from the original novel and the early Universal Monsters movie, since I feel like that is probably why she was included in the original lineup, since it is a technically Universal Monster property, even though it's modern day. I feel like it's more associated with the musical. So I wanted to take screenshots from the movie, and the one of the illustrations from the novel really influenced this design a lot was him in the big skeleton mask and the big red cloak ascending down the staircase. And of course I wanted to include reference to the musical with the big cloak silhouette and the half mask. So that's what I'm starting off here with this design. Lots of chains, but primarily keeping that silhouette from the musical. And speaking of the musical, I also wanted to stick with the half mask that was used with Operetta, since it solves the same problems of you need a character to be able to show emotion and be able to have more ability of what you can do with animating the character. And I feel like that is a good solution, and it works for both the musical and a cartoon, which I'm imagining designing for here. So with the second outfit, I wanted to go with a more sort of rock Pinterest look with some glam elements, since on the mood board you'll also see a bit of glam inspiration, like glam rock, since she is a very musical character, obviously, and the progression from, opera to then leap to rock over, a long period of time. But and then I also wanted to include on the board a reference to a 50s outfit, just as reference to her original style. And I also found myself being drawn to the style of Dolly. I felt like it was very fitting for the Phantom character that I was going here, and being very bold and dramatic and having these very strong silhouettes. So I was definitely influenced by that too. I also wanted the Phantom, since he is a very self-conscious character, feeling very monstrous in his body, to then for translating this into Operetta, wanted her to have a lot of her skin covered and not be showing a lot, and wearing a very very high coverage outfit. So that was what I was doing in the third look there, where every bit of her is covered, and she also has this transparent overskirt and an organ corset, which I really like the idea of. Then for the fourth look here, I was inspired by Dolly's pants, and wanted to incorporate some sort of water motifs as the heels on her shoes, since the Phantom has the catacombs which are filled with water that he rose through, so I wanted to include some little references to that. Then for the fifth look here, I wanted to go for a very glam, operatic, posh look, and included some reference to the stars in Christine's hair in the musical in hers. So now I'm just writing out my ideas of what I liked best for each part, so that way I can combine them all and have a design better than anything I'd be able to come up if I had just done one shot at it. That's really my favorite part of these series, is being able to experiment and try out different things. I feel like it definitely helps me sort of explore different opportunities of just being able to come up with 5 different takes on any character just very quickly. I also found myself being drawn to the purple and red palette that Operetta ends up having very naturally, because again, I tried to approach these not knowing what Monster High is. Obviously I do. I'm quite influenced by it, and a lot of it seeps through into just my style and preconceived notions. But I found that the purple and red palette was actually sort of organically found here through the red of the Masquerade outfit, present in all versions of the Phantom because it's so iconic, and the Universal movie, in the scenes where the Phantom shows up, it has a purple filter on it a lot of the times. So I found myself selecting that as the skin color. Even though the skin color is originally described as sort of a parchment yellow, I felt like a purple here would be a bit more fun, since they're, analogous color scheme and all that. So for her final look here, I wanted to include her big hat from the Masquerade scene. You can see I'm here finicking with what I want to do with the overall silhouette, because I liked these sort of shorts with leggings underneath look from the third look, but I wasn't quite happy with it. So I ended up transitioning it into an overskirt with that sort of V plunge to it, and then having it splay out towards the back to sort of mimic the big cloak silhouette that the Phantom has in a lot of his portrayals. I also wanted to include some chains throughout to sort of make reference to just general ghosty Phantom associations, and also to reference the way that the character Eric feels very trapped in his own body. Now I'm sketching out with what I want to do with her face here. I wanted half of it to be very skeletal and the other half to be quote-unquote normal. I also wanted to play around with her hair texture in reference to that, where the hair on the side of her face that's skeleton is sort of like wispy and straight, and the hair on the other side is very voluminous and in these big sort of like ringlet curls. Playing around with her eye makeup here, I want it to be very dramatic, have these big like drips, very glam rock on her, and I wanted her mask to also incorporate the same makeup but in a more sort of like artificial drawn on to the mask way, and also incorporate some aspects of piano keys and sort of have that mimic the look of a skeleton skull. So I'm just finishing up sort of my very loose concepts here, and here is the line work that I did for it. So I'm starting out thumbnailing out the colors here. Obviously I wanted to keep that organ corset because I thought it was a fun little reference, and I wanted to incorporate these sort of like flame fire looking sort of like tendrils to her skirt, again as reference to the chandelier fire. Speaking of the chandelier, I also had it as her earring, which I thought was a cute little reference. So I'm just incorporating some blue throughout her design, and a last minute idea I had while doing the line work was to incorporate some mirror shards onto her opera gloves, because obviously Phantom of the Opera, she has to be wearing opera gloves, and I wanted to incorporate these shards on it as reference to how he's behind a mirror in Christine's room. So I'm just sketching out here. You'll notice I have two different layers of line work, and one is the layer with the mask and one is without, so that way I can have both versions of the operetta piece available for viewing. And it's interesting that the different hair textures also ended up sort of looking like an undercut, which I feel like is another nice little reference to sort of Pinterest rock. So I'm just coloring in her hair here. I wanted it to be sort of like the different colors on either side, but I feel like it ended up looking a little bit misbalanced, so I ended up having it just be a blend of this magenta and this sort of like salmon color. Also wanted to include some blue in her eye makeup, again to sort of keep the motif of water throughout her design in very subtle ways, and to keep with the 3-point rule, which is generally if you want a color palette to be cohesive, to have it appear in 3 different places throughout the body, so it's on her eyes, at her head, and then at the scarf and arm piece, at her torso area, and then a little hint of it right at the bottom to keep the piece balanced. I also wanted her pants to be this cream color, again to reference Dolly's, and just in order to make it so it's easier for me to make sure I'm coloring everything in, I just decided to color it in this sort of like electric blue color and then correct it to the right one afterwards, which I'll do sometimes because it makes it a lot easier than trying to see cream on white background. I also wanted her to have this little like 3-tiered gold belt situation because I wanted her cloak to resemble, with the bright red and the gold trim, sort of a curtain, like a stage curtain, and I really thought that was cute and clever, and I wanted to keep that sort of look of how it's bustled throughout her design at the same level, so even though the cloak is behind her, the shape still continue on the front with this sort of like looped chain belt. And you'll notice there a scorpion button used to make that little bustle on her cloaklet, and that is a reference to, in the movie, there are these 2 like buttons. One is a grasshopper or cricket, and the other is a scorpion, and I wanted to make reference to those little buttons throughout her design. Her shoes, I had a lot of fun designing. Obviously I had to keep the cleft note heel from the original one because it's one of my favorite pairs of shoes they ever designed, and I also wanted to add some gold, just again to keep that throughout the palette, and then have the sort of like front part of the heel be these big chunky piano notes to again make reference to music, and I feel like the shape of it is also a little bit reminiscent of sort of like glam rock boots. And of course there's a little ghost at the heel in reference to the Phantom, of course. So just playing around with the transparency of the sort of fiery skirt there. I had a lot of fun drawing the little sheet music on her pants there. It is a reference to sheet music I could find online of some of the numbers from the musical. I don't know how to sight read, so they could be completely off. The ones on her jacket and her cloaklet, are completely random though. Now I'm finally starting with the shading, just doing some purple highlights on the hair, and one of the things I like to do is to not shade with just darker versions of the color that it is, like, so instead of just using like dark red, on the reds of it. I'm using the purple. I feel like it adds a lot more contrast and interest to a piece. I'm also really happy to have been able to include her original sleeve tattoo going up, just a peek from underneath the cloaklet there. One fairly dramatic change that I ended up making from Operetta's original redesign is that I wanted her to have these black scleras with little gold eyes, whereas Operetta in G1 has normal eyes. I wanted it to be a bit more ghostly looking, since the movie describes it as, quote, his eyes are ghastly beads in which there is no light, like holes in a grinning skull. So I thought that would be a fun little reference to include, just to make her design look a little bit more monstrous, because I felt like, I don't know if you ever hear this anymore nowadays, but I remember when Operetta was released, you heard a lot of people being like, she doesn't read like the Phantom of the Opera, she's just a purple person. So I wanted to include some more monstrous elements in her design here and there. While of course keeping it in like strictly a fantasy realm, because I feel like that's something a lot of people struggle with Phantom of the Opera adaptations, is trying to make it more realistic than fantastical. I definitely had a lot of fun in this piece, coming up with all sorts of different little references throughout her outfit and making sure that everything is very intentional. I feel like my last redesign, Abby, was quite detail-packed, and the one before that was Rochelle, who I tried to make very simple in her design, and I feel like Operetta is sort of like a mixture of those two different styles of her design having not a lot of different pieces, but each piece having a good amount of detail while still focusing on having a striking silhouette, more than just like everything being overwhelming with detail. Like the cloaklet is primarily solid colored with just a little bit of sort of spider web embroidery at the top and some fringe, and the skirt that is transparent mostly is completely detail free, which I feel like is really rare when I'm doing these Monster High redesigns, to have anything just be like a solid color. I mean, it's a gradient, but you know, completely solid with no details. So here I'm messing with the levels, because red and purple, while an analogous color scheme and well established in art, is one of my least favorite personally. So I was having sort of trouble like figuring out how to balance all these things, because it's not a palette I'm super familiar with using. I also found it interesting finding yellow and gold popping its way in through this palette, because I know that before Operetta was released, one of her earliest design stages had her be a primarily yellow colored character, so it was fun seeing that color sort of pop its way through naturally as well. So there I'm just figuring out the mask. I ended up incorporating the little like cliff note or like music note shape into the top of it, and having the piano keys sort of mimic skull teeth at the bottom and have the eye sort of dripping down into that shape. So now I'm just copying the makeup application onto the mask as well, so it matches. I think that'd be a fun little painted detail to include in different releases, is that her mask stays the same but the makeup on it changes to match, if not a bit more dramatically so on the other side, to keep it looking more sort of artificial and not just like part of her skin. So for the background here, I used a picture of an auditorium I took many years ago at this point, and I'm just messing with the levels. And a fun little thing I wanted to do with the sort of glow shading is I wanted it to look like she was standing in a big spotlight, instead of having it just be sort of a generic glow behind someone. So you can see there I'm shading on the floor to sort of have it look like she's casting the shadow in front of her. Then it's time for my favorite part of adding the sparkle overlays, which I really think always carries a piece to me. I feel like it's a nice little finishing touch, and it's definitely a fun trick that I learned in this series specifically. So here is the final reveal. I'm really happy with how she came out. I love how like vibrant her palette is, while still being like fairly dark in terms of like the overall look of it. I feel like it has a lot of depth to it. I definitely really like how she came out, both with her mask on and her mask off. It's a fun little challenge having to do sort of almost two different pieces in one little tiny area of it. So I'm really happy with how it came out, and especially happy with how her legs look with the sort of big notes on them. I think that's a really cute little print that'd be an easy detail to do and throw in. The total redesign time for this project was exactly 3 hours and 1 second, which is quite satisfying. I also really like how red-based she is. So yeah, I'm really happy with this redesign. Now moving on to the comparison between generations, we have Gen 1, Gen 2, and my redesign. She has not appeared in Gen 3. But I feel like my design is so radically different from these other two that it's kind of hard to make a comparison. Gen 1 and Gen 2 is very based in sort of like psychobilly, rockabilly style, and mine has none of that. She has a vaguely similar color palette, but it's really hard for me to compare the 3 generations because I feel like this is a really vast overhaul of what you see in the original. So now moving on to a mini little lineup because the image is now too wide to really see any detail in, so I've decided to break it up into groups. So here's what I have of group 2 so far, sort of the second wave release characters, and there will be more added to this image, of course, and you'll sort of see little sneak peeks as we go through the details of the 4 different groups that I have. So there's Operetta with the lineup. I like how she blends in, and I also feel like my art style has really started to improve a lot lately than compared to some of the earlier designs like Jackson and Holt there. I also feel like Operetta and Torlai would be really good friends. So again, here's the final redesign. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Make sure to like and subscribe for more, because next month is going to be a Ghoulia redesign, which I'm really excited for. I've been waiting for a long time, but she kept losing in the polls. She is probably my favorite character, if I had to say. So I'm really excited to redesign her. And you can also follow me on my art Twitter and my art Instagram, where I post art at least 3 times a month, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!